Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and welcome to Guests in Gusto. This is SCAD's virtual series of conversations and digital content with the creators and innovators who are remaking our culture. I'm Michael James O'Brien, the Associate Chair of Photography here at SCAD Atlanta, and today I'm extremely happy to welcome our special guest, Michael Joseph. Michael Joseph is an internationally published street, portrait, and documentary photographer. He's had numerous exhibitions, including Aperture Gallery in New York City, Rayco Gallery in San Francisco, and most recently, the Atlanta Photography Group right here, where his work was selected by Sarah Kennel, curator of photography at the High Museum. His work is held in many, many museum collections and private collections as well. And Michael is currently represented by Daniel Cooney Fine Art. Today, we're going to be discussing his portrait photography and in particular, two ongoing projects, Lost and Found and Wild West of the East. He'll explain that title to us as well. And you are welcome, of course, to follow his work on Instagram. It's at Michael Joseph Photo. So at Michael Joseph, Joseph Photo. And Alex, can you tell us what our poll question is for today?
Sure.
Alex Sachs is with us.
So the poll question today is, which of Michael's projects would you like to hear more about? Lost and Found, Wild West of the East, In Hand, or Closer Strangers? So let us know which of those projects you want to hear more about, and then we'll give you the results of the poll towards the end of the presentation. And Michael, this is for an opportunity to win a book, correct?
Yeah, it's a history of, I want to say, the World History of Photography, 5th edition, which is a great book. No doubt Michael will be in the 6th edition, so it's a good time to get this one while it's being offered. I want to mention, maybe Alex said this, that we have time for questions after the conversation. It would be ideal if you can put them into the chat so we can go through them. And of course, we can keep the conversation rolling through Instagram way after, but we're going to kind of keep it down today to about an hour. Now, I'm very happy to turn the screen over to Michael Joseph.
Hello, hi everyone. Thanks for having me, first of all. This is great. I'm sorry I can't be at SCAD with you, everyone. But I guess this is the next best thing. What I'd like to do first is start off by showing you a video. It's kind of a montage, the photographs from Lost and Found. Instead of going through each one individually, I just kind of smashed them all together to music, so it's a little bit easier to watch. It's two songs. The first song is one that I selected. The second portion, which you'll notice it changes over, is actually a song that was written by one of the travelers. And it's a little bit more painful. It has some, curse words in it, and it's a little bit more serious. And you'll notice there is a little bit of duplication between the first song and the second in terms of portraits. And that's because sometimes someone has passed away in the second half of it, or you'll see a difference between someone who's been photographed years apart. It's the same person. So what I'm going to do is start with that. It'll just give you a general idea for what the project is about. It started in October of 2011, so it's been a very long-term project for me, which is one of the things that I'll be talking about today. So what I'm going to do is share my screen with you and bring up that slideshow. You should hear the music. If there's any issues, let me know. Great. All right, and here we go.
Well, I am the reason that you smoke cigarettes, and I am the reason that you shoot heroin. I am the reason for your pain, and I am the reason that you're still traveling. Well, it shouldn't have took me long to tell you that you're loved, and if you ever run into trouble, I hope you call me up. But for now, I'll just sit here waiting by the phone and wonder if that next call will leave me permanently alone. I am the reason you cut your pretty hair, and I am the reason you got no clothes to wear. And I know that I fucked it up, but now I'm the reason that you don't care. Whether you're high as fuck on the streets of New Orleans, whether your baby girl has got some food to eat, when you pass that drunk in the middle of the street. So I'll sit here and cry as I write this song, knowing the things that mattered most were the things that I did wrong. I should have never let you put that needle in your arm. I never meant to be the one to cause you harm. Baby, I love you, and all I wanted you to say was that you loved me too, but it doesn't seem that way, and I am the reason. I am the reason. I am the reason. I'm the reasoning. 'Cause I am the reason that you starve yourself, and I am the reason that you're living in this hell. I am the reason. I am the reason. I am the reason that you're gone.
All right, I'm back. So that's it's about 6 minutes long or so, but it takes you through many, many years of making portraits with a specific subculture who call themselves the Travelers. So that's the Lost and Found project. What I'd like to do is actually, instead of explaining every aspect of that project, I'm just going to really go through a presentation that goes through process and start you from the beginning and go through the end. I'm going to talk relatively fast, but I'll try and keep it slow in some way so you get as much out of it as you can. It's meant to be a little bit more instructional, but I'm trying to show you a little bit of my thought process behind the scenes and the process that I use in making my photography in person on the street and in the moment. So let me share my screen one more time real quick, and I'm going to start a slideshow for you. Great. Okay. Michael, can you see that okay?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, perfect. So this is kind of beginnings for me. When I was taking photography classes at the New England School of Photography, I took a class on portraiture and specifically making portraiture in public. And someone said to me, the instructor actually said, why don't you go out and make the type of portrait you've always wanted to make? And this is what I came up with. It was very interesting because I got torn apart for making this photograph. And it wasn't until a couple of years later that I actually went back and found this photograph. Ironically, it it is almost the beginnings of what became the Lost and Found project. When you look at it, I was really interested in, photographing someone on the street. I was interested in expression. This person was very shy, and I saw that he had the word lost tattooed on his arm, or sorry, his hand. And I couldn't quite figure out how to photograph a hand and a face at the same time. There's a lot going on in the background, which, I ended up eliminating as other projects kind of came through. So this was really the beginning when you go back, and it didn't really dawn on me until many years later. So the point with this being that just because you make something that someone doesn't like, number one, or number two, that isn't very good, by certain standards, hang on to it, because it may be the beginning of something that you're just really not seeing just yet. So really how I started out was doing regular street photography. And one of the things that I was attracted to a lot was actually just mannequins, which is really weird. And I thought this was taken on Madison Avenue in New York City. And I thought it was a little odd that a mannequin in a window of a very expensive store can have actual expression. And so that's what I really looked for in people that I would see as I was passing them on the street, was an expression, trying to kind of catch them or talk to them. And then I would go on the New York, the subway, catching interesting things like the same type of person just separated by a pole. And then I would start to walk in New York City and find people that I just, for some reason, they seemed interesting to me. So again, just more street photography. And then that turned into street portraiture. This is in Lowell, Massachusetts, which is kind of an old mill town that's now fairly run down. New York City, again, right outside of Macy's, actually. So I don't do everything in black and white. I did do color as well. This is during a Youth Pride organization or organizational event in Boston. So I saw this kid and couldn't resist but make a photograph of him. And again, not always necessarily against just a blank background too. Just at a regular fair, I thought it was ironic that it said brute strength, but here's someone who seems very small. And then at that fair, I was able to photograph, and I'm sorry for the my tag on or signature at the bottom of these photographs. It's just a lot of work to kind of reorganize and remove them. So I excuse those, please. So this was a portrait that I made very up close of the guy who ran the show there at the circus. And I just saw something in this that I wanted to move in that direction. And that's where I started making close-up portraits. And then I was in Las Vegas with some friends in 2011, and I saw this gentleman. And if you look online and read a lot of stories about this, this is kind of where the Lost and Found project kind of started. And I jumped out of a cab and I saw this gentleman on the side of the road, which at the very beginning of the video, you could see what he looked like standing on the side of the road. And he just had an interesting look to him and an anchor tattoo on his face. And I asked him to make a portrait. I didn't get any information from him because I was just formulating what the project would be. And it wasn't really that important to me at the time. He gave me about 20 minutes and we parted ways. And it wasn't until I got home that I realized that it was something that I was interested in pursuing further. So I'll stop now and just briefly talk about some influences, which you'll see moving forward very quickly. Bruce Davidson for having the ability to be on the New York subway and get extremely close to people, using a 28 millimeter lens or a 35, whatever he was using. And, which means you're actually even closer than this was. And having the ability to do that is just amazing. Lowry Clark for digging into worlds that not every person would, have the ability to do, and in such an amazing way, and capturing a humanity. And you can see in the eyes in this young boy that something's definitely going on. And then Dykstra, who was really interested in evolution of a person. She has multiple series going on, a lot of youth. But specifically, this was a soldier that or a boy that she documented going into the Army, and then how he grew up. And so time is really important. And I took that lesson from her work and moved it forward. And then this is another lesson that I use with her work, is looking at someone before and after. And so this is before the bullfight and someone after the bullfight. And she was interested to see, how someone emotionally changed before something that was so brutal, and then after something, and could she capture that emotion? She also did the same thing with women before birth and right after birth as well. And then Richard Rinaldi, who's a huge icon for me, and he's just one of the best portrait photographers, especially street portrait photographers that I know and can think of. He did a series called Touching Strangers, where he would pair up two people on the street or in public, wherever happened to be, that didn't know each other, and see how they would react. And this is very interesting. You can see the one man just clenching his fist, not wanting to put it around the other man's shoulder. So he's just really brilliant. And not only does he shoot color and he's doing large format, he does black and white as well. And this is from his Manhattan Sunday series, where he would go out on the street when clubs were letting out at the very wee hours of the morning to capture people as they were coming out of the clubs. And which is also very interesting. And his projects really do come from a personal place, even though it may not seem that way. And I'll talk about that a little bit too. And then more recently, Emily Earle, who I believe is an alumnus of your school, who did a series called Late Night Polaroids. And I think they're just fantastic. And she did it over a period of time as well in Savannah, capturing the young scene that was going on at that time, up until, I still think she's working on it now. She'll still go out. But she just actually published a book, and I'm a huge fan of hers, and we chat back and forth, even though we've never met in person. So check her work out. I just think it's fantastic. So getting back to, those are just some influences. Getting back to this particular portrait, this was called a series called Close Strangers. And one of the reasons I wanted to work on these close portraits is because I wanted to meet people that I wouldn't normally meet in real life. In real life, meaning my personal life. And so going out on the street in the United States or wherever you happen to be, you're going to run across people that aren't in your circle. They're not your family. They're not your immediate friends. And you start to kind of widen your world in a way that, our world is closing in on us a little bit. We don't really meet people because we're either stuck behind screens. We can see them through the screen, but we don't actually interact with them. Your friend circle or your family circle gets smaller and smaller as we age. So I was trying to go out and make portraits of people that I was interested in specifically. So as that evolved, I would go to New Orleans and walk around, and this was a local artist there who I just thought was fantastic. And then a woman who was I saw on the street who looked like there was something wrong, about to cry. A church greeter in New Orleans as well, just had that interesting look to her. A woman who sat on the beach in Revere, Massachusetts every single day, who normally I wouldn't say to smile in a portrait for whatever reason it happens to be, but when she smiled, everything kind of just wrinkled in the right way. Another man who just happened to be just wandering around, who had that look that I thought, I need to make a portrait of this person. And then in the process of doing Close Strangers, I would run into actually travelers, and I didn't know that's who they were. I won't go too much into detail, but the travelers, I would meet a lot of them along my way, and the Close Strangers project ended up becoming a project about the travelers. So this is another one that was Close Strangers that ended up becoming part of the Lost and Found series. So Close Strangers ends up becoming Lost and Found. The point to this is that sometimes you set out to do one thing and you actually find something else along the way. There's a lot of ways that different people work. And if you are a student, one of my lessons that I always say is go out and just make something and see where that leads you. You don't necessarily have to have an idea set in stone as to what you're doing. You don't have to formulate that completely. Sometimes you let the photographs lead you in the right direction, either because there's something you find interesting about that and you just keep going with it, or you may find yourself incorporating your life into someone else's, whether it be one specific person you're making a series about or an entire culture or subculture or group of people. And that's what I ended up finding myself, the direction I ended up finding myself in. So here's a couple photographs of me making photographs, because sometimes people would stop and photograph me for some reason making photographs. And you can see I'm literally just on the street. This is in Miami, of someone up against a wall. And this is a traveler. He just doesn't necessarily look like a traveler. and in my own travels would run across these travelers all over the place. Again, this is just to point out that I'm really making photographs anywhere. This is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, not too far from where I live, and using any background that's blank, because that's how I work, and I make the street my studio in a sense. Rarely do I shoot at night, but you can see how the lamppost would make a spotlight on the actual wall. And that's how this portrait was made, using traditional studio process, in the sense where you say, oh, there's going to be a butterfly underneath his nose. You can actually use the light that you have available to you to still have those same constructs, but just use them to your advantage. So you don't really need to walk around with portable lighting if you can become a little bit creative in your process. Again, using a corner, light will spill in different directions. That's that same corner that I used. And here's the traveler allowing me to step on his backpack, which became something that was very common, actually. Again, just as an example, how would you use this light to reflect? It's, you can put someone in the shadow, but yet the light is extremely strong right next to them. And what's that going to look like? What's this going to end up looking like? Okay, so this is a couple that was a traveling couple that I ended up photographing in this particular space. And that's the photograph that came out of that space, which you wouldn't necessarily think. People would always say, well, that was taken in a studio. But the reality is that it's not. It's a matter of reflection, light, and knowing where that light's going to fall. This is in Times Square. And I didn't actually make a photograph here, but I thought that this would be a wonderful place to make a portrait, because you can see how the light is spilling in from the side. And it would likely highlight a lot of texture, or make great shadows, whatever it happens to be. It's a good example of that. Another example, this is a traveler named Seamus or Shameless, who on one background looks one way, and yet I had him flip up his hair and you can find a scar on another background another way. And so these were taken maybe 20 minutes apart from one another. So you can see how just shifting someone or moving their hair, his expression is not too dissimilar, but you get two totally different photographs. And this is actually one of the walls that I used. This was taken a year later, because I went back to actually photograph that particular wall. It's a parking garage. Here's another example of, this is in Austin, Texas, and the traveler behind me's name is Blue, and I was photographing another traveler, and you can see how he allowed me to step right up on top of his packs and support me, because I'm not that tall to make this photograph. And then I found myself in Cheyenne, Wyoming. I was in Denver, and I drove all the way up to Cheyenne to meet up with a specific traveler. And then we ran into this traveler, and we went under a specific underpass near a bar where everyone would meet up. And this is me making a portrait. So it doesn't have to be a doorway or New York City in a wall or any specific place, anywhere where I could find light spilling. That's how these portraits were made. And I continue to work that way. A lot of questions I get is, do you always shoot for black and white? And the answer is no. I'm actually shooting for color a lot. And so I do try and find backgrounds that work. You'll never see me really put up the color photograph, but you can appreciate it, especially in conjunction with the background as well. So I am really working with color as well too. And here's another side-by-side where you can see the black and white traveler on the left, which I never ended up using this photograph, but then the color that I found to really go with the color that would complement his clothes and hair and the whole 9 yards. And this is the photograph that I ended up going with for him. And then, of course, when you're dealing with a couple or a child, this is my kind of digital contact sheet. You can see how things completely change as you're working through that. And so you have to really just keep going. And eventually you'll find just the right photograph that makes everything work. And of course, if anyone's photographed children, which or babies or toddlers, that things are constantly moving and changing, and you never know what you're going to get. So there's always just that one, which ended up becoming this photograph. And then this became another photograph that was just absolutely one of my favorites, not only because the people in it are so wonderful, but also it really does kind of answer the question, can you capture a moment in a photograph that is not necessarily staged, but it's something that, you know, is collaborative. Obviously, I didn't catch these people, together in that moment, but we decided we were going to make not a portrait that was singular for either of them, although I did, but put them together because they were together at the time, and really come up with the moment. So, you are able to find emotion even when something is, collaborated with, and kind of search for that. One of the things that I always do is try and obtain personal stories and audio. And you'll notice in my Instagram account, it's a great way to relay what the story is with this, any particular traveler or person or subject. And this guy's name is Ruben, and his background was that he was in the military, and he was able to, we became friends on Facebook, and then I was able to find a portrait of him, or a picture of him, excuse me, literally sleeping while he was, in the field, so to speak. So I'm always interested to know who this person is, what their background is, what their story is, why they ended up, in the position that they are in, and where they are likely to go in the future. So I do get those stories. And if you can get audio, I always say that's even a bonus to that, because sometimes hearing the texture of someone's voice adds to that. So remember, I always tell people that, photography is really it's mostly failure, because, we talk about things called the hit rate, like how many great photographs can you get in one day. As a street photographer, that when you walk around, the odds are that you're going to make lots of bad photographs or miss the moment, or you could walk around all day and get nothing. So play is something that's really important to me in terms of photography. You just have to continually remind yourself that you're really out there to have fun, and the process is what makes it fun. It's not necessarily going to a gallery show that is the most important or rewarding part of it. It's actually going out there and making the work. When I take trips to New Orleans to work with the Lost and Found project or wherever I'm going, I have to remind myself that I'm traveling to do this and to enjoy the day and the time and the people that I'm meeting along the way. And then there's a great book, which everyone I feel should read, that I continually read over time, the Art and Fear book, which really just nails down some really key points along the way, because you'll do something and then doubt it and then move forward and then doubt it again. And I just say you have to learn to move past that, and remember again that play is such an important aspect of not only photography but art in general. That's really what you're there to do, is explore and have fun with it. So now a little bit, moving into the process. This is a quote from that book, and it says, "Making art provides uncomfortably accurate feedback about the gap that inevitably exists." Hold on, I'm going to lose this here. "Exists between what you intended to do and what you did. In fact, if art making did not tell you so enormously much about yourself, then making art that matters to you would be impossible. To all viewers but yourself, what matters is the product, the finished artwork. To you and you alone, what matters is the process." And I find this to be absolutely true, because other people are looking at what you came up with, but only you really know what was going on at that specific time. And that's the fun that I'm talking about, and the play, and being able to enjoy what you're doing. Hold on one moment. Okay. So a great quote from Annie Leibovitz as well. A thing that you see in my pictures is that I was not afraid to fall in love with these people. And you'll see lots of pictures of me with the people that I photographed along the way, because when you're making collaborative portraiture and you're working on a long-term project, it's really important to me that I stay in touch with a lot of the people that I'm photographing, because they're not just people that you're making a photograph of walking away and saying, "Oh, great, I have this, image now, or I can make a print of it and I have an object now." It's actually that you're meeting people and learning about them, and it's a process. So a little bit look into the process. So this is Knuckles. Again, I won't go into the vast story about him, but we met in Las Vegas in 2011, and then ironically, I ran into him in Chicago, and this is what he looked like a couple of years later. And I was a little bit dumbfounded. And again, I won't go into the story, but it's very bizarre that I was able to run into the same person twice, and finally was able to get a release from him at that period of time, because I didn't, previously. Another thing that I say, if you're not able to shake someone's hand that you meet on the street, then, even if it looks like this, of course, be cautious, however, with open wounds. However, that's why they called him Knuckles. It said knuckles across his knuckles. But you have to realize you're dealing with humanity, and humanity is all walks of life. It's all different people, and everyone deserves respect, no matter whether they're, dirty, very wealthy, poor, whatever it happens to be. Someone's microphone is going off. So again, with the process, here's a little conversation between myself and Seamus, or Shameless, as time goes on. And you can see, he was talking about how he had talked to his dad. It was the first time in 2 years. I said, how did it go? And he said, I sent him the picture that you took, and he was so proud. And he wanted to actually see what the picture looked like in a gallery in person. So keeping in touch with the people that you photograph is so very important. Again, one of the photographs I made of this particular traveler became his profile picture on Facebook, and then ended up in a gallery show. And then I gave him directions to go to the gallery. And so he showed up at the gallery dressed in the same exact thing that he was in the photograph in. And the woman who was sitting at the front sent me a message immediately and said that she was just stunned that she saw someone could jump out, basically out of the frame, and walk in there. So that was, pretty great. And then getting press is great, but it can also change your project, which is something that's always really interesting to me. This same picture ended up showing up on CNN Photos talking about the travelers. And you can see that it was in 2015, and now it's 2020. So this is years and years later. And so people that maybe wanted to be hidden or not seen or unseen are now seen in a way. And so I was a little bit cautious and curious how this would change the course of the project. Would it change it at all, knowing that it was out there, and that, people that didn't maybe want their photographs to be out there were out there, and how would this change things? And I had conversations with some of the travelers who saw this, because it does get blasted out through social media and it becomes seen. Through that, when a story like that goes out there, of course, as a result of that, I get lots of emails and messages from parents who are looking for their kids. And so these projects that start out, you're talking to one real person and another real person, but then it becomes something that's very real. And so when you're dealing with real people, you have to understand that you're going to have a lot of real life scenarios unfold in front of you. And that may not be your intention. When you're walking around doing street photography and you make a photo and walk away really quickly, that's one thing. But when you start to make collaborative portraiture and involve yourself in lives of other people, it will start to have a ripple effect down the road. This is, I'm not going to read through this, but this is just a letter that I received that someone sent to me. It was a family member, and they saw that their son was up in a gallery show, and they wanted to write about what they felt about seeing their son up on the wall. And then I continued to follow Knuckles on his journey. Again, I won't keep going through this, but this is through Facebook. And Knuckles, as he continued along, ended up in Malaysia, ended up having a child, become a Malaysian citizen, and his life took many drastic turns. So I became very much involved in his life. And we still keep in touch to this day. So, meeting someone on the side of the street, you never really know what's going to happen. As long as you're open to that, I think that's a great thing. And so this is, 2 years later, however long later, when I went back to New Orleans, I saw the same church greeter at the same church, getting ready for work or coming from work, and photographed her, the same artist who would be walking the street, a year or two later, however long it happens to be. And these people become, people that you see all the time. So just like Dykstra was interested about how people would move and age over time, this is an example of a traveler, from high school, and you can see her photos. This is her own photos. as she moves throughout time. You can see her evolution from being one type of a teenager to another type of young adult. And I just thought that was so interesting. Again, these aren't my photos, but it's going back and learning the story and the history of these people. And then years later, the photograph on the left is the portrait that I made in New York City. The photograph on the right was me meeting up with Johnny, is his name, in Austin, Texas. And then shortly after that, he ended up passing away. The photograph that I made ended up becoming his memorial photograph, again, pointing out that this becomes real life. And then there was a memorial that was held in New Orleans for him and other travelers. And then this is me with other travelers. Again, just, you can't really be afraid of involving yourself in other people's lives. And then some really interesting things can happen. So my project ended up all over the place, and Helena Christensen, who is a original supermodel, ended up seeing it and asked if I would make a portrait of her. And of course, on the most freezing day right before Thanksgiving, we met up, and I made a portrait of her on the street in a similar style that I would do. Just a great honor to have someone reach out to you, and very unexpected. And one of my lessons of that is just go with it and say yes. What do you have to lose? So in the evolution of a project, I find these stages that I go through. The first is experimentation. The second is learning. So you're kind of learning what's going on with the subject matter, gaining access to a subculture or subject matter, building a foundation for your project, working on the project over time, making progress, refining that project, and then looking for more opportunity to propel that project forward so you can continue working on the project. I know I'm going through that fast, but that's really kind of the timeline. So working on a new project, the Wild West of the East, which I'll touch on very quickly. I know I'm running out of time. This is Provincetown, Massachusetts, which is on the very tip of Cape Cod, which is a wonderful place to visit. And I love going back and forth to Provincetown. On the flip side of Lost and Found being a very tough subject matter sometimes, the Wild West of the East and Provincetown is a very colorful, happy version of that. So I started out doing just regular Polaroids. How is this going to look? This is the experimentation process I'm talking about. And then, continuing forward, okay, well, maybe it's going to look like this. And then I ran across a book on the street. I'm sorry? Oh, so I ran across this book. It was on the window of a bookstore, and it said Norman Mailer's Provincetown, the Wild West of the East. And I picked it up and I said, oh, this is interesting. I took it to a coffee shop, read it in about 20 minutes. It's very short. And I thought, wow, this might be something, this is really interesting. I think I might go with this idea, and started experimenting. And the regular Polaroids that you would see here, which is just an XS70 camera with new Polaroid film, a friend of mine named Benjamin Fredrickson, who's a great photographer, said, you would probably love the big shot. And there's a lot of reasons why. You should get some pack film and experiment with it. And when I started finding expired film or Fuji film, which is a little bit less, it's expired now, but they had okay. I would find the box would come and it would say for ID cards. And I thought the concept that someone was using this film for ID cards or to show their identity was really interesting, fold in that. And this was the first one I ever made with Benjamin, who's a friend of mine just right on the street. And then this is a performer in Provincetown who I always saw as kind of a sad clown. And then I started making more and more of these street portraits, and you can see how small they are, and they just fit into the palm of someone's hand. And they started posting them on Instagram. On the left was a model from Massachusetts, and on the right is Brian Sims, who's a representative from Pennsylvania and Philadelphia. And so things started to get out there, and I continued to work on the project. And you can see some multiples on the left. You can see me working on the street on the right. I was even experimenting with just I think it was a 400 or 450 old Polaroid camera as well. And these are kind of the images that I came up with. This is Freddie. He actually passed away. This is Sharon. I'll just go through a couple of these as well. One of the performers, she's a drag queen named Tammy Brown, if you know her at all. And this is a guy named Sasha, who ironically is from Provincetown, who I photographed in Provincetown, and I met him there. And he's a traveler. And so, of course, I would end up meeting him along the way somewhere else. So this is the traveler portrait that I made of him. So he's the only person to really cross both projects at the same time, which became an interesting twist for me. And then again, this summer, I was able to meet up with him and make yet another Polaroid of him. One of the things I fully believe, if you're going to be part of something, you have to dress the part and be part of something. So this is at a party where people would be dressed. You can see my bag on the right on the floor with the Polaroids, and I'm using the camera. And a crowd around me, you just have to ignore the noise. And this is the portrait that I kind of stitched together that ended up becoming a, out of that party. This is from the summer. This is a fashion designer named Erin Robertson, who is one of the Project Runway winners. And again, like a creative soul who was in Provincetown for the summer, getting influenced by everything that the nature of Provincetown, everything that had to offer. So I just asked if she would be part of the project. And then a guy named Russell. And this was, again, recently made. And you can see the background right behind. This is taken just literally right on the street. And then here you can see my process again. You know, I'm just working on the street with the same camera. You can see the street on the right side over there. And again, a collaborative process where we're looking at some of the portraits together and seeing what works or doesn't work. You can see my poor mask. And there's the three of us. This was a couple who was celebrating their 5-year anniversary in Provincetown. And on the left is an actor named Sean Allen Krill, who's in a show called Jagged Little Pill, and his husband, who's also an actor named Harry. That was the portrait I made of Sean, and then both of them together, which was really a gift for them. It was great that I could use it for the project, but it was a gift that I made for them. And then things start rolling along with the project. So it'll be featured on The Fence, and then also was published in Another Man magazine last February. So, you know, as things continue to roll on, I just keep working with the project and hope it matures and keep it going. And that's kind of moving along with that process. So that's it. And it's a lot of information. I hope I gave you a little bit of insight into the way that I work, some of the influences that I have, and how I'm shooting on the street.
Michael, that was fantastic. I have to say, with a lot of information. We're going to share the recording with everybody, but I have a couple of questions, and I'm going to synthesize a lot of the questions that came up in the chat because they are, a lot of them, about the same topic. While I look through a few, I'm going to ask you to tell all of us, especially my photographers, do you, and this is related to what I'm going to ask you next, do you get a release from everyone you photograph?
I do get a release from everyone that I photograph. And I learned the lesson the hard way with that first portrait that I made of Knuckles, where I never got it, and then luckily got it many years down the road. But because I'm shooting so close, number one, and it looks like a studio, number two, I think it's really important. But anytime you're really collaborating with someone on a portrait and it's really personal and really close, and you're getting a story attached to that, I feel like it's really important to get that release so you both understand where you're coming from. And it's very rare that I get someone who would say no. You know, they want me to share the work, they want their story to be out there. And if they say no, then it's a no, and that's fine, you know, and I can just use it as a learning experience. So absolutely.
Well, that's a great answer. Just to put together, Kyla Reese, Kylan Lager, Doug Powell, Greg Lartigue, James McCowan. I'm synthesizing the requests from these people. I'm just going to read one. As a stranger, how do you convince your subjects to trust you? This is a huge issue, obviously, and you talked about it, but so many people are asking this. And is it a complex process? What do you try to learn about your subjects before photographing them? And do you stay in touch? So that synthesized about 8 of the questions that are, name some of the people that asked that question.
So I'll go backwards if I can remember it. Do I stay in touch? Absolutely. There's lots of reasons why. Number one, I'm genuinely interested in the people that I'm photographing, and staying in touch with someone. If it is someone who may know someone else that could be involved in a project, it only broadens your scope. And so I think it's very important, not in a selfish way, just in a way to get to know and understand what's going on. So like a town like Provincetown, there's so many different types of people in Provincetown, even though it's very LGBTQ plus centered place now. I'll talk to someone who says, oh, you have to photograph this girl, Sophie, who is the daughter of the owner of Spiritus Pizza because X, Y, and Z. Or, oh, you have to photograph this performer. I know them. Let me introduce you. And so staying in touch with people and continuing to have the appetite to explore is what makes these projects really interesting and rewarding. What was the one, the one right before that?
Well,
the trust part?
Yeah. Let me come back to it for a second. And you try to learn about the subject before photographing them, for example.
So for some,
do you try to learn, or you meet them and you see them, or do you get the story as you're going along? How do you manage to balance that?
Actually, for the most part, I love to just approach someone on the street, introduce myself very quickly, and make the photograph. Because the value that has is, especially in the Wild West project, is you're catching someone in the moment. So the one that you saw that almost looked like it had no background, that was someone during a carnival, which is a period of like a celebration parade where someone was just walking down the street. They had a dress on. He had a dress on that was painted the same way as his face. I said, hey, nice to meet you. I'm working on this project. Explained it very quickly. He said, oh my God, let me do this for you. He lifted his dress above his head. I made the photograph. He signed the paper and walked on his way, and that was it. So, in those instances, there's really no story, but the story is told by the front of that person. I mean, you can just see it and read it. So for the Lost and Found project, it's gaining trust by understanding where they're coming from and understanding their background. And so the more you can learn about it, I would say, hey, where are you coming from? Where have you traveled to? Who are you hopping with? They understand that you know where they're coming from, and you can look past, like I said, shake someone's hand. If they're dirty, it doesn't matter. You just keep going. And that's where you establish the trust. They understand that you know what they're all about. And so a little bit of research, but I don't specifically seek out certain people except this summer in Provincetown because of COVID. So that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a question that would be very practical for you, Mike. Someone's asking, is there a website that we can buy prints of your photography? Who do you want to refer? This is from Caleb Knotts. Who do you want to refer them to?
So in terms of prints, you would have to contact the gallery, of course. So that would be Dan Cooney, Daniel Cooney Fine Art, and he can be Googled as well in terms of purchase of prints. Only because I work through him, so I'm not really, obligated to sell directly to you.
That's great. Forrest is asking you about the name Travelers. Can you tell us if that, or the origin? Who calls them Travelers? Do they call themselves Travelers? Where does that come from?
They call themselves Travelers. There's alternate names like Dirty Kid or Gutter Punk or Crust Punk, which come from, it's almost like a negative word or a bad word to call them gutter punks. That's a derogatory name. But really, traveler encompasses every type of traveler that you would come across, because there's all different variations of that. There's people that are more into like the 70s version of that, which is a lot of peace and just being chill, and other people who are very much into the train culture, and other people who are very much into the punk music scene. And so that's where all that variation comes from. So traveler just is a word that encompasses all of those people.
That's great. I wanted to ask you, one of my students that was researching your work in my portrait class mentioned that they saw a distinction between Lost and Found. I think you've talked about it a little bit, and Wild West of the East, and used the word personal. Do you feel that there's anything about the Polaroids, the Wild West and the East, that includes the process, because Polaroid is very different, and Lost and Found? Would you use the word personal to describe a difference, or how would you say aesthetically, and maybe in terms of the process, those two projects feel different to the viewer?
So I'm glad they feel different, because I set out not to do the same thing completely repetitively, because for me personally, that's boring. You can get pigeonholed into doing this. Everyone wants to see the same type of black and white portrait, but um, for me personally, it was getting sad, and not sad, but just disappointing when people were passing away. It became a hard project because I became personally invested in it. And so this was a way to steer myself away from that. I was obsessed with 80s subculture, the East Village, and Norman Mailer going between Provincetown and the East Village in the time of Warhol and Madonna and Basquiat and Herring and Mapplethorpe. When someone mentioned that I might like that big shot camera, I didn't even honestly know what it was. And then when I did the research, I said, this is great. And it forces you to be very still close to that person and invasive in their space. One of the things that's interesting about that is that it creates this personal part of the project where I have to rip open the photographs in front of the subject, and we see them together. So it's a surprise and a process together. I can't just run away with my camera and look at them later. And I can't edit them. Whatever you get is what you get. And sometimes you rip it open and they can read the disappointment on your face, and it's really frustrating. And other times you rip it open and both of us scream, like, because it's a great photograph and we love it. Or I can see how the subject responds to the photograph of themselves, and I know which one that they really love or which I love. And it's a really cool way to work together. It legitimately is instant photography, right? So in the Lost and Found project, that's a little bit different, but we are still working together, and I, behind the scenes, will get the story and sometimes see how the story matches up with the photograph. I hope that answers the question.
No, I think it's a great answer. Collaboration seems to me to be the key to practically everything, even though it's a word that's used over and over again. What real collaboration, if it really happens, is the key to all this. I have one last question for you from
Sure.
Dylan McDaniel. Have you ever taken a photograph you regretted taking?
No. And it's funny that you asked that, because there's a photograph that I almost regretted taking. And then as time went on, I didn't regret taking it. And so that was of a photograph of Freddie, which was the Polaroid, one of the Polaroids. And the thing is that Freddie is not all there, and he would always walk up and down the street. He was a fixture of Provincetown. And when I was making the photograph, I thought to myself, I'm not quite sure if he understands what's going on, although he was photographed all the time. I mean, he's been in projects and he's just a fixture of Provincetown. So I thought, no, on one hand, it's really important that I make a photograph of him, but on the other hand, I would really like to get to know him, but I don't really I didn't know if that was possible. So it was a very quick cursory type of a photograph. And then it turned out that he passed away. And so that photograph that I have is now part of the project, and it's a memory, and people comment on that all the time. So it became something that I was hesitant to do. And so it originally started off as something that I was hesitant to do, but then became something that was very important to the project. So someone said to me, this project will age well. And I didn't really know what they meant. And now I, of course, know exactly what they mean.
Yeah, that's great. I guess actually there's one other question that a lot of people are asking. During the time when everyone's been sequestered and dealing with restrictions of travel and so on, what adjustments besides the picture that you had where you're wearing a mask in Provincetown have you had to make? Because your subject matter has to be out there in the world in front of you. It's not something that you can do in a studio like still life or self-portrait. What adjustments have you had to make, or have you found challenges about making this work in this particular moment in history?
So it's the first time that I've really had to do street portraiture, but make it like a sitting, so to speak, where I would ask the person permission ahead of time to make the portrait. And I would either find them through a friend or see them or know that they existed in the town because they were someone who was there last year or worked in the town, or I saw them, or they're an artist or a creator like Aaron Robertson was. It's that aspect that was a little different for me. It was great because I had more time, but on the flip side, it was less spontaneous, and so I wasn't able to capture someone in a moment or a mood at a party or pulling them from a parade where they were dressed some way for the day, whatever happens to be. So it takes that part away from it, but it added a different part because I was able to fully work with someone. It's not something I was generally used to, but it was a learning process for me towards the end of the season. So yeah.
That's great. Alex, do you have anything to tell us, Alex Sachs, before we say goodbye and thank you to Michael?
Oh my gosh. Well, I just think it's been an incredible presentation,
Incredible.
Mike. Thank you so much. I mean, what a great opportunity for the students to understand also the backstory of how these photographs come together. And you're just a natural teacher and you show such compassion for your subject. So thank you so much for a wonderful presentation. And I'm going to share the results of the poll. I think you covered pretty much what everybody wanted to. It was kind of equal. So, thank you so much for participating.
You're more than welcome. Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it.